Okay, what I've talked about a little bit is the new skis and some ideas, some newer ideas of where I believe that commonly accepted technique will be going in the future. Some of the problems that we have is a lot of resistance to change within our sport. Overall, though occasionally we get bright colors and new things that way, the sport itself is very conservative and doesn't change very quickly. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the ideas that maybe have hung on past their usefulness and how sometimes some of the older ideas were actually very, very correct as well. So if we were to look at the older skis that we have here, this is certainly the first metal ski made by Head, had metal in it. Back in, I would think, the 50s is when this ski came out, and if you move up into the 60s and 70s, you're dealing with the Rossignol. This is a wood core ski that has fiberglass wrapping. So these are some of the evolutions in the technique. But one of the real first big changes, certainly we went from a wooden ski like this. This one happens to have screwed in metal edges. That was a big change in our sport. But you can see shape-wise the skis didn't change much. But the big change is somewhere in between these two, or this and this. Ski boots change. This happens to be a child's boot in a sense, but some people remember the buckled leather boots with the buckles. Some of us even recall boots that had lace-ups and low leather boots. And really that was the first big change in boots once the heel got tied down. And actually this wooden ski gives you an idea of some of the first skis that had a binding that held the heel down to the ski as we evolved from the Telmark technique to more parallel techniques that have followed into the 30s, 40s, and 50s. So the idea of having a lower leather boot, one of the problems for that was the stability in the ankles. And if you can recall, you might remember that ski technique was a feet together, legs together, and that was functional at the time. With lower leather boots, there wasn't a lot of stability laterally, so the idea of putting one leg and bracing it against the other was a functional way to ski. What happened is that style of skiing became popular. Probably the person who popularized it the most, that most people know the name of, would be Stein Eriksen. Now he also did some things that were we look at now today, and I realize biomechanically were very, very correct at the time. If you look at a picture of Stein, and one of the best pictures that I know of Stein is on the top of Aspen Mountain. There's a great picture of Stein in his reverse shoulder angulated position. And if you start to look at that, functionally though his legs are together, think about the idea, we've talked about the idea of pressure on the ball of the foot, supination, this counter rotation. Even though the feet are together, this position, he's able to maintain the pressure the way he wants, the way it should be, even today on the ball of the foot. And I would think if we could take that picture and possibly Photoshop an inside leg position that's up and separated, that you would actually see that he's skiing today like many, many of the skiers would be in a very dynamic situation. So functionally, biomechanically, Stein's position as he moved inside the turn, biomechanically, we believe is very, very correct. The difference, the things that have changed is the boots now are higher and made of plastic. That now directs the forces and allows us to ski with a more independent leg action. That became the popular terms about skiing into the 70s and 80s, was independent leg action, which the newer boots, the plastic boots, allowed. That was probably the biggest change from metal edges and bindings. The leather to plastic boot was a big, big change and allowed a different style of functional skiing. But some people today, as I talk with groups, some people today still think of good skiing as feet together, legs together, as a style. Again, it was a functional style that is no longer needed today. If the boots are lined up properly, we can then move and have a better base of support without having to worry about the stability. But some people still hang on to to that particular style of skiing and regard that as good skiing. It's hung on past its usefulness, I would say. Another thing that's changed when we talk about how we pressure the ski is that when you look at a ski like this one, there was a time when you needed to have a boot that was stiffer because we needed to get pressure out past what we refer to as the anti-friction device, because we needed to load up the forebody of the ski to get it to begin to engage, as well as to loosen the tail of the ski to let it come around. The only way that you can get pressure past what we've talked about, the ball of the foot, is to have something to lean on. So many people at that time talked about pressing into the tongue of the boot. And it's amazing to me today that I still hear this in ski instruction, is to press into the tongues, to stay forward, bend the ankles and press into the tongues of the boots. I've heard it referred to as squeezing grapes between your shin and the tongue of the boot. We've talked a little bit about position of the body, and we've talked about that a lower position is a weaker position. So yet why would we now still be teaching people a technique that was based on an older ski, when today we have a modern ski with the side cut that all we have to do is tip it, it automatically engages both the tip and the tail, and pressure only needs to be applied to the center, the balance, turning balance point of the ski. So right now we're in a position where people are still have technical ideas and concepts that at one time were useful and functional that are no longer needed today, and we would say now that range of motion is more valuable to us than stiff boot that allows us to put pressure someplace on a ski where it doesn't need to be any longer. If we over-engage the tip, we've loosened the tail, we're changing the shape of the turn. You can see here that if I were to apply pressure out into this area, I've bent the tip of the ski a lot and don't have very much bend in the tail. The ski isn't going to be able to carve and sustain the shaped round turn that we've talked about. So again, some people are still using ideas and concepts that were functional in a certain type of equipment that no longer are needed, and yet they still hang on to that outdated idea.